Pack your bag if you don't like my rules, my father snarled, voice bouncing off the framed family photos like a slap. You're just a guest in this house. Remember that. The word guest detonated in my chest. I stood in the living room with my hand on the zipper of a scuffed carry-on, trying not to let my face betray the sting. The TV flickered with some late-night rerun. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. Mom's knitting needles clicked, then froze. My sister hovered on the stairs, one heel dangling from her toes, pretending to scroll her phone. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. Daniel, Mom said quietly. Let's not. Dad cut her off with a look. Linda, I'm done arguing. Olivia made her choices. She can make new ones out there. I swallowed, tongue dry. What choices? I work 2 shifts and hand you half my paycheck every week. I pay the power bill. I stocked the fridge this morning. And you think that buys you a say? He shot back, stepping closer. The veins in his temple pulsed. You're living under my roof, eating my food, using my water. When I say no more freeloaders in and out, I mean it. I brought Nora here for one night because her boss changed her schedule and she missed the last bus, I said. She's my friend. She's safe with me, he barked a laugh. You don't know what safe means. I do. I've kept this family afloat for 20 years while you dabble in pity projects and side hustles. His mouth twisted. There's a reason I'm the one whose name's on the mortgage. Mom's eyes found mine, apologetic, pleading. Olivia, maybe you should give your father some space tonight. Give him space? I'd been giving him oceans of space since I learned to duck his temper and patch up the damage he left behind. I zipped the suitcase in one hard motion. The sound felt like a closing door. Chloe finally looked up from her phone. You don't have to make a scene, she said, voice soft but sharp around the edges. It's not that deep. Not that deep. My throat burned. I picked up the handle and stood tall. Okay, I said. My voice surprised me, level, almost calm. If I'm a guest, then I'll leave like one. Dad crossed his arms, satisfied. Smart. And Dad? I added, meeting his eyes. That line you love, about the name on the mortgage? I let a breath out through my nose. You might want to stop using it, he smirked. Why's that? You'll see. It was childish to say it. Maybe petty. But the taste of it was the first clean breath I'd taken in weeks. I dragged the suitcase to the door. The wheels thudded over the lip of the threshold like a heartbeat. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. The porch light bathed the walkway in a sterile cone of white while the rest of the street lay quiet, asleep. I lifted my bag into the back seat of my dented Corolla and slid behind the wheel, staring at the house number I'd memorized by tracing it with chalk as a kid. If I squinted, I could still see the faint pale circles on the porch where the lemonade glasses used to sweat in July. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers hurt, then forced myself to release it. I wouldn't cry, not yet. There was work to do. I didn't go to Nora's. She shared a studio with 2 other nurses, and I refused to wedge my baggage into anyone else's life. Instead, I pulled into the 24-hour laundromat on Maple and sat alone under its fluorescent hum. A man in a reflective vest snored upright in a chair by the soda machine. A college girl folded towels under headphones. In the corner, a neon open sign buzzed, pink and tired. I texted Nora. I'm okay. Crash your shift. Don't worry. She replied instantly. Where are you? Do you want me there? I've got it, I typed. Promise. I opened my backpack and took out a thick, creased envelope. Not dramatic, just paper. But paper can be heavier than bricks when it carries the right signatures. I thought of the months leading up to that envelope. Double shifts at the diner, the side business building websites for local shops at night, teaching myself contract language between coffee refills and dawn. Quiet meetings with the bank officer who treated me like a person instead of an interruption. The title company woman who slid a stapled packet across a laminate counter with a look that said, I know what you're doing. And I hope you're doing it for the right reasons. I'd been saving. calculating, strategizing. Not to hurt my father, though tonight his words made that feel justified, but to stop the bleeding that had been happening behind closed doors for a long time. The missed payments he concealed. The refinancing he insisted was no big deal. The rage that flared whenever anyone brought up money. The way he used that mortgage like a weapon. I knew the day would come when the house would be lost. Not because of fate, but because pride has a way of burning everything it touches. So I found a different path. My own. I set the envelope on the folding table and laid my palm on it to calm the tremor in my wrist. I repeated the sentence I'd learned to say without flinching. Ownership is responsibility, not power. It was the only way this would mean anything. I didn't sleep. I watched the dryer spin a stranger's clothes in a silver porthole and thought of a girl who learned to tiptoe around anger and became a woman who confused endurance with love. Sunlight bled into the edges of night around 6:10. I wiped my face with a napkin, shouldered my bag, and drove to the park across from the bank. Sparrows ripped at crumbs on the path. A runner's breath ghosted in the cool air. Through the glass, I saw the morning staff filter in, the manager turning the lock and flipping the sign. My phone buzzed again. "Do you need a ride?" "Nora, I need you to have breakfast with me after," I wrote. "I'll explain everything." Everything? Everything. At 8:15, my dad's truck pulled into a space by the entrance. He climbed out in his work jacket and the boots that had carried him through a lifetime of job sites and long hours. He looked tired, older than he had a year ago. I wanted that to matter to me more than it did in this moment. He strode through the doors like the world still cooperated with his certainty. I stood across the street and watched him reach the counter, tap his nails on the laminate, and hand the teller a check with the same flourish he'd always used, a little theatrical, like he enjoyed it. I recognized the teller, young, polite, the one who always called me Ms. Hayes when I helped Mom deposit her check. He typed, tilted his head, typed again. His face changed in small, careful ways people learn in customer service. The flicker of concern, the choice to swallow it, the attempt to make the news less sharp. Dad leaned in, impatient. The teller explained. His mouth moved. Dad's smile faltered. He pointed to the screen. The teller shook his head. The manager came out. Papers, dates, a line of words that would land like a hammer. As of yesterday, deed and mortgage are held by... I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I knew the sentence. I had read it a dozen times, breathless each time. Olivia Hayes. Dad staggered back, one hand braced on the counter. The manager's lips were sympathetic. Sympathy can feel like salt. He turned, slowly, like gravity had doubled, until his gaze lifted past the reflection on the glass and out to the street. To me, our eyes locked across asphalt and morning sun. His face twisted through surprise, then confusion, then something far more fragile than rage. Fear. Not of me, not exactly. Fear of the story he'd told himself finally cracking. The story where control equals care, where possession equals love, where the person who keeps you smallest can claim to be the one who kept you safe. I raised the envelope in my hand and held it like a peace flag that could be mistaken for a weapon. He came out, door chimes soft and cold behind him. "What did you do?" he asked, voice hoarse. "What I had to," I said. My heart drummed. "The house was drowning, Dad. You were drowning with it. I moved it before the bank or some investor did. I took the weight before it crushed us. You took my house. I took responsibility," I said, careful, steady. "There's a difference." He glanced at the envelope. "You think paper makes you powerful?" I shook my head. "No, it makes me accountable." For a long moment, the traffic hissed, and the light changed, and no one noticed a family story rewiring itself on a sidewalk. He turned his face away, jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched. "You could have talked to me," he said. "I tried," I answered softly. "For years," he stared at the curb. "You made me small. I made myself big," I said. The words were heavier than they looked. "That's not the same thing," he didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence said what both of us knew. Nothing about this morning would be simple. I didn't want revenge. I wanted room to breathe. I tucked the envelope back into my bag. I'm not here to throw you out. I'm here to lay out terms that protect Mom, protect Chloe, protect the roof we all sleep under. If you'll meet me at the kitchen table at noon, I'll show you the plan. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Noon, he said, like agreeing cost him something real. Maybe it did. I nodded and stepped off the curb toward my car. Behind me, the bank door chimed again. The day had begun. Accountability, not power, I reminded myself, and drove toward the house I had just inherited the burden of saving. The air in the Hayes house felt heavier than I remembered. When I pushed open the door at noon, suitcase still in my trunk, the silence inside was brittle, stretched thin like glass. Mom stood at the counter, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't sipped from. Chloe lounged at the kitchen island, scrolling her phone, pretending she wasn't listening. Dad sat at the head of the table like a king stripped of his crown but refusing to give up the throne. "Olivia?" Mom whispered, her voice fragile. "What's happening?" "Your father came home. He hasn't said a word since." I set my bag on the floor and slid into the chair across from him. The envelope lay on the table between us, thick with documents that now defined our future. Dad's eyes were bloodshot, jaw locked. He didn't look at me, just at the papers like they were a snake ready to strike. "You've embarrassed me," he finally said. His voice was low, dangerous. "Walking into that bank like you're the savior, making them say your name instead of mine." I leaned forward, pulse racing. "I didn't do it to embarrass you. I did it to stop the foreclosure notice that was coming next month. You didn't tell us, but I saw it. In the drawer." Mom flinched, her mug rattling against the counter. "Daniel, is that true?" He didn't answer. His silence was an answer of its own. Chloe's phone screen dimmed as she finally looked up. "So, wait, Olivia owns the house now? Like legally?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Legally, completely." Chloe laughed, short and sharp. "Wow, Dad, you let this happen? The girl you called a guest just became the landlord." "Enough," Dad snapped, slamming his palm against the table. "I built this home with my hands. I paid every bill. I sacrificed." "You gambled," I cut in, louder than I meant to. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. "You gambled with loans and pride, and you almost lost everything. I didn't take this house from you, Dad. You gave it away every time you refused to listen." He finally looked at me. His glare burned, but behind it, I saw something I'd never seen before in him. Uncertainty. Mom set her mug down and moved closer to me. Her eyes shimmered with both hurt and hope. "Olivia, what does this mean for us?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "It means no one's getting thrown out. Not Mom, not Chloe, not even Dad. But the control changes. The shouting, the threats, the way he uses the mortgage like a weapon. That ends today. You think you can just waltz in here and—" Dad started, but his voice cracked. "Yes," I said, cutting him off. My voice didn't shake. "Because it's not about power, Dad. It's about safety. About finally having a home that doesn't feel like a battlefield." The room went quiet again. Chloe stared between us like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Mom's hand brushed mine, hesitant but supportive. Dad leaned back in his chair, eyes darting to the walls, the ceiling, the house he thought defined him. His lips trembled. "Without this house? Who am I?" For the first time, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I felt tall. I felt steady. "You're still my father," I said softly. "But now, you're going to have to learn what that means without hiding behind ownership papers." He closed his eyes, shoulders sagging like a man carrying 20 years of mistakes. For once he didn't argue, and that silence was louder than all his shouting combined. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Every tick of the kitchen clock sounded louder, sharper. Dad sat rigid, fists clenched on the table, while Mom hovered near the stove as if she needed to hold something solid to keep from falling apart. Chloe leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes flicking between us like she was watching a courtroom drama. "You think you've won?" Dad muttered finally, his voice low and bitter. But you don't know what comes with responsibility. Bills, repairs, taxes. You think the bank cares about your noble speeches? I leaned forward, my voice steady but fierce. I already factored all of that in. I've been paying for months, quietly, because I knew you couldn't keep up. His head snapped up. You went behind my back? Yes, I said firmly. Because every time I tried to talk, you turned it into a shouting match. I gave you chances. You chose pride over honesty. The silence cracked. Mom pressed a hand to her lips, eyes welling with tears. Daniel, she's right. We've all felt it. The tension. The bills piling up. You've been carrying everything alone, but pushing us away, too. Dad's face hardened, but his voice trembled. I wasn't pushing you away. I was protecting you. Protecting us, I shot back. My pulse thundered in my ears. By screaming at me like I'm a stranger? By telling your own daughter she's a guest in the house she grew up in? The word guest hung in the air like smoke, choking everyone in the room. Chloe finally spoke, her voice sharp with teenage bluntness. Dad, you humiliated her. And now you're mad because the house is in her name instead of yours? That's not protecting anyone. That's control. He glared at her, but Chloe didn't flinch. Don't look at me like that. I've watched this for years. You tear Olivia down every chance you get. Maybe now you'll see she's stronger than you ever admitted. Dad slammed his fist on the table, rattling the envelope. Strong, she betrayed me. I stood up, chair legs scraping against the tile. My hands shook, but my words came out clear. I didn't betray you. I saved this house. You were drowning, Dad, and instead of asking for help, you dragged us all under. I refused to sink with you. His face flushed, then drained of color. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the envelope like it had stolen his entire identity. Mom stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder. Daniel, maybe this is a second chance. Maybe Olivia can carry what you can't anymore. He jerked away from her touch. I don't need anyone carrying me, he hissed. But his eyes betrayed him, haunted, desperate, scared. I softened my voice, but I didn't back down. You've always believed that control equals strength. But real strength is admitting when you can't do it alone. I'm not here to take your place as head of this house. I'm here to stop it from crumbling. For the first time, his eyes flickered, not with rage, but with something dangerously close to shame. The clock ticked again. Chloe exhaled loudly, setting her phone down. So what happens now? She asked. I looked at each of them, then back at my father. Now, we decide if this house is going to be a prison or a home again. No one moved. No one spoke. But the cracks in the walls of our family were finally showing, and for once I wasn't the one breaking. Dad stood from the table so fast the chair scraped back against the tile. His chest rose and fell like he'd run a mile, his eyes darting to every corner of the house. The walls, the photos, the ceiling beams. It was like he was realizing the home he'd claimed as his own was no longer under his command. This house is my legacy, he said, his voice hoarse but sharp. Every nail, every dollar, every night I stayed awake worrying about bills. Mine. He jabbed his finger at the envelope. And you think a stack of papers erases that? I rose too, meeting his gaze head on. No, it doesn't erase what you've built. But it also doesn't excuse what you've destroyed in the process. You can't keep holding us hostage with the mortgage, Mom's voice cracked as she spoke. Daniel, she's right. You've let anger replace love in this house. He looked at her like she'd just struck him. Linda, don't, she whispered, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. I've watched our girls walk on eggshells for years. I've watched Olivia carry burdens you never even saw. She deserves better than to be treated like an outsider. The words shook him more than anything I'd said. His jaw tightened, but his eyes glistened with something he refused to let fall. Chloe finally broke the silence, blunt as ever. Dad, if you can't handle that Olivia saved this house, maybe you don't deserve to live in it. Chloe, Mom gasped, but I raised a hand. No, I said firmly. She's right to be angry. We've all been living under the weight of his pride. But this house isn't just his anymore. It's ours, and the only way forward is if he accepts that. Dad's face crumpled, not in rage, but in defeat. He sank back into his chair, staring at his hands. If I'm not the one holding this house together, then who am I? I took a deep breath and sat down across from him. My voice softened. You're still my father. That doesn't change, but maybe it's time you let us hold you too. Stop fighting us like we're the enemy. The room stilled. Even Chloe lowered her arms, her expression shifting from sharp to uncertain. For a long time, Dad didn't answer. His shoulders hunched forward, the image of a man carrying 20 years of battles he never admitted he was losing. Then finally he whispered, I don't know how to stop fighting. I reached across the table and slid the envelope toward him. Then start by signing this. It makes everything official. You'll still live here. Mom will still live here. Chloe too. But the threats, the yelling, the guilt trips, they end. You don't get to use this house against us anymore. His hand hovered over the papers, trembling. His pride screamed at him to resist, but the truth had already hollowed him out. Slowly, hesitantly, he picked up the pen. The scratch of ink on paper sounded louder than his shouting ever had. When it was done, he pushed the pen away like it weighed 100 pounds. He didn't look at me, but his voice broke as he said, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I swallowed hard, my throat aching. Maybe not today, but you can earn it, if you choose to. Mom's tears finally fell, silent but steady. Chloe grabbed her phone again, but this time she wasn't hiding behind it. She was wiping at her eyes, pretending she wasn't moved. For the first time in years, the Hayes house felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but no longer suffocating under one man's pride. As I gathered the papers back into the envelope, I caught Dad looking at me, not with anger, but with something fragile. Something almost like respect. And in that moment I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the home we all deserved. The house wasn't his anymore. It was finally ours.